Barbara Morrison stood at the window of her corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over downtown Chicago. At 52 years old, she had everything she had worked for: a partnership at one of the most prestigious law firms in the Midwest, a beautiful apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, and a reputation as one of the best defense attorneys in the state. But tonight, none of it mattered. The jury had returned their verdict 3 hours ago, guilty on all counts. Her client, Marcus Chen, a quiet software engineer who had been accused of embezzling millions from his company, would spend the next 15 years in prison. Barbara knew in her heart that he was innocent. She had seen the doubt in his eyes, heard the tremor in his voice when he swore he hadn't taken the money. Every instinct she had developed over 25 years of practicing law told her that Marcus was telling the truth. And she had failed him. Barbara pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The city below looked so small, so distant. People were going about their evening routines, completely unaware that somewhere in this vast metropolis, an innocent man was sitting in a cell, his life destroyed by a justice system that was supposed to protect him. Barbara? A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. It was James Patterson, the senior partner who had mentored her since she joined the firm straight out of law school. "Can I come in?" She didn't turn around. "The door's open." James entered quietly and stood beside her at the window. He was in his 60s now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes were still sharp and kind. "I know this is hard," he said gently, "but you did everything you could." The prosecution had a strong case. "He didn't do it, James." Barbara's voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't know that for certain." "Yes, I do." She finally turned to face him. "I know it the same way I knew that Thompson was guilty 5 years ago, even though we got him acquitted. I know it the same way I knew that Rodriguez was telling the truth about the accident. I know it, James." The senior partner sighed deeply. "Then the system failed him. Not you." "I am part of the system," Barbara said. "I stood up in that courtroom and argued his case, and I wasn't good enough. I wasn't convincing enough. I didn't find the right evidence. I didn't ask the right questions. An innocent man is going to prison because I failed. Barbara, you're being too hard on yourself." "Am I?" She picked up a folder from her desk, the one containing the financial records that the prosecution had used to build their case. "I should have dug deeper. I should have found the real thief. I should have protected him." James placed a hand on her shoulder. "Take some time off, a vacation, clear your head. These things happen in our line of work. You can't win them all." But Barbara barely heard him. Her mind was already far away, replaying every moment of the trial, searching for the mistakes she had made, the opportunities she had missed. She had dedicated her entire adult life to the law, believing that justice would prevail if she just worked hard enough, prepared thoroughly enough, argued eloquently enough. Tonight, she understood how naive she had been. That evening, Barbara went home to her empty apartment. She poured herself a glass of wine that she didn't drink and sat in the darkness, staring at the lake. The moon cast a silver path across the water, and she watched the waves roll in and out, endless and unchanging. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues offering sympathy and support. She ignored them all. What could they say? What words could possibly make this right? Marcus Chen was innocent, and he was going to prison. His wife would struggle to raise their 2 children alone. His elderly parents would watch their only son waste away behind bars. His life was over, and she was responsible. Barbara didn't sleep that night. As dawn broke over the lake, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she made a decision. She couldn't continue doing this. She couldn't keep playing a game where innocent people could lose everything through no fault of their own. She couldn't live with the weight of this failure pressing down on her chest every time she took a breath. She would resign. The next morning, Barbara walked into James Patterson's office and placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. It was her letter of resignation, effective immediately. "Barbara, don't do this," James pleaded, looking up at her with genuine concern. "Take a few months. Take a year if you need to. But don't throw away your entire career over one case." "It's not about one case," she said quietly. "It's about realizing that I can't keep doing this. Every time I defend someone, there's a chance I might fail them. And if they're innocent, if they truly don't deserve what happens to them, then I'm complicit in their suffering. I can't carry that anymore, James. I'm sorry." Despite his protests, Barbara was firm. She spent the next 2 weeks clearing out her office, transferring her cases to other attorneys, and saying goodbye to the life she had built. Her colleagues were shocked, some even angry. They couldn't understand how she could walk away from such a successful career. But Barbara didn't care about their opinions anymore. She sold her apartment, gave away most of her possessions, and bought a small, reliable car. With no particular destination in mind, Barbara drove out of Chicago on a gray November morning, leaving behind the city that had been her home for 30 years. For weeks, she drifted from town to town, staying in cheap motels and eating at roadside diners. She wasn't looking for anything specific. She just knew she needed to get away from the law, from courtrooms and judges and juries and the constant pressure to win at all costs. Eventually, she found herself in a small coastal town in Oregon called Riverside. The name was somewhat misleading, as the town was actually situated along the Pacific coast, rather than near a river. But it had earned its name from the small creek that ran through the center of town before emptying into the ocean. Riverside was the kind of place that time seemed to have forgotten. The downtown area consisted of a single main street, lined with mom-and-pop shops, a diner that had been serving the same menu since the 1960s, a small library, and a post office. The population hovered around 3,000 people, and everyone seemed to know everyone else. Barbara rented a tiny cottage on the outskirts of town. It was modest, with just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room with a fireplace. But it had a view of the ocean, and Barbara could fall asleep each night to the sound of waves crashing against the shore. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Part 2. The awakening winter in Riverside was mild compared to Chicago. Instead of bitter cold and heavy snow, there was rain, lots of rain. It fell in a gentle, steady rhythm that seemed to wash away some of Barbara's pain. She spent her days walking along the beach, collecting shells and watching the seabirds dive for fish. The locals were friendly, but respectful of her privacy. They could tell she was running from something, and they didn't press her with questions. But as the weeks turned into months, Barbara began to feel restless. She had never been good at sitting still. Even in her darkest moments, she needed something to do, some way to occupy her mind. One rainy afternoon in February, Barbara walked into the local library to escape the weather. The head librarian, a cheerful woman in her 60s named Dorothy, greeted her warmly. "New to town?" Dorothy asked, even though she clearly already knew the answer. In a town the size of Riverside, everyone knew who was new. "Yes," Barbara said. "I moved here a few months ago." "Well, welcome to Riverside. I'm Dorothy Chen." She extended her hand, and Barbara shook it, trying not to flinch at the surname. It was a common enough name. There was no reason to assume any connection to Marcus Chen. "Barbara Morrison," she introduced herself. "Are you looking for anything in particular today, Barbara?" "Just something to read. Maybe something about the area?" Dorothy's face lit up. "Oh, you should check out the local history section. We have some wonderful books about Riverside's past, and if you're interested in getting more involved in the community, we have a bulletin board near the entrance with volunteer opportunities." Barbara thanked her and spent an hour browsing the shelves. She checked out a few books about Oregon's coastal history and, on impulse, stopped to look at the bulletin board on her way out.
Most of the notices were typical small-town fare: advertisements for music lessons, notices about upcoming town meetings, requests for help with various church activities. But one flyer caught her attention: Riverside Animal Shelter, volunteers needed. The flyer explained that the local animal shelter was looking for volunteers to help care for the dogs and cats. No experience was necessary. They just needed people who loved animals and were willing to dedicate a few hours each week. Barbara stared at the flyer for a long time. She had never had pets. Her career had been too demanding, her schedule too unpredictable. But standing there in the quiet library, with rain pattering against the windows, she thought about how empty her days had become. She pulled the flyer down and tucked it into her bag. The next morning, Barbara drove to the address listed on the flyer. The Riverside Animal Shelter was located on the edge of town, a modest building surrounded by chain-link fencing. Despite the rain, she could hear dogs barking as she approached the front door. Inside, the shelter was warm and slightly chaotic. A young woman in jeans and a sweatshirt was mopping the floor while talking on the phone, balanced between her shoulder and ear. Two cats watched Barbara from their perch on top of a filing cabinet. "I'll be right with you," the young woman said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. Barbara nodded and waited, looking around at the notices and photos covering the walls. There were pictures of happy families with newly adopted pets, thank you cards from previous adopters, and a large calendar marking upcoming adoption events. After a few minutes, the young woman hung up the phone and turned to Barbara with a tired but genuine smile. "Sorry about that. One of our fosters had an emergency with a pregnant cat. I'm Sarah Mitchell, the shelter director. What can I do for you?" "I saw your flyer at the library," Barbara said, "about needing volunteers." Sarah's face brightened considerably. "Really? Oh, that's wonderful. We're always short-handed around here. Have you worked with animals before?" "No," Barbara admitted, "but I'm willing to learn. That's all we ask." Sarah grabbed a clipboard from behind the desk. "Let me give you a quick tour, and you can see if this is something you'd like to do." As they walked through the shelter, Sarah explained how the operation worked. The shelter could house up to 30 dogs and 40 cats at a time, though they were often over capacity. They relied entirely on donations and volunteer work. Sarah was the only paid employee, and even she was only part-time. "We take in strays, animals whose owners can't keep them anymore, and rescues from difficult situations," Sarah explained as they entered the dog area. Immediately, they were surrounded by the sound of barking. Dogs of all sizes and breeds pressed against the chain-link gates of their kennels, tails wagging, hoping for attention. "Hey guys, settle down," Sarah said affectionately. She turned to Barbara. "They get excited when they see new people. They all want to be loved." Barbara looked at the dogs. Some were clearly purebreds, probably surrendered when their owners could no longer care for them. Others were mixed breeds of uncertain heritage. There were puppies bouncing with energy and older dogs lying quietly in their beds. Some looked healthy and well-fed, while others were thin and scarred. "That's Max," Sarah said, pointing to a large golden retriever mix with graying fur around his muzzle. "He's been here for 8 months. His owner passed away, and the family didn't want him. He's the sweetest dog you'll ever meet, but people usually want younger animals." Barbara walked over to Max's kennel. The dog stood up slowly, his tail wagging gently. His brown eyes were kind and tired. "Can I go in?" Barbara asked. "Sure." Sarah opened the gate. "Max, this is Barbara. Be nice." But Sarah didn't need to worry. Max approached Barbara carefully and sat down in front of her, lifting one paw. Barbara knelt down and shook it, then scratched behind his ears. Max leaned into her touch, closing his eyes contentedly. "He likes you," Sarah said softly. Barbara felt something inside her chest loosen. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of warmth. Max didn't care that she was a failed lawyer. He didn't know about Marcus Chen or the guilty verdict or any of the mistakes she had made. He just wanted someone to be kind to him. "I'll do it," Barbara said, still scratching Max's ears. "I'll volunteer." Sarah grinned. "Excellent. When can you start? How about tomorrow?" And so Barbara's new life began. She showed up at the shelter the next morning at 8 o'clock, dressed in old jeans and a sweatshirt. Sarah put her to work immediately, teaching her how to feed the animals, clean the kennels, and handle the dogs during walks. It was hard work, much more physical than anything Barbara had done in years. By the end of her first day, her back ached, and her clothes were covered in fur and dirt. But she felt more satisfied than she had in months. She quickly fell into a routine. Every morning, she would arrive at the shelter and begin with the feeding. The dogs had to be fed first, as they were the loudest and most demanding. Then came the cats, who were generally more patient. After feeding, she would start cleaning the kennels, a process that involved removing soiled bedding, hosing down the concrete floors, and replacing food and water bowls. The work was repetitive and often unpleasant, but Barbara found it therapeutic. There was something calming about the simplicity of it all. No complex legal theories to navigate, no clients to please, no opposing counsel to outsmart. Just basic, honest work taking care of creatures who needed help. Her favorite part of each day was walking the dogs. She would take them out one at a time, leading them around the property or down the quiet country road that ran past the shelter. Some dogs pulled on their leashes, eager to explore every smell and sound. Others walked calmly by her side, content just to be outside. Max became her special friend. Every day, she made sure to spend extra time with him. They would walk together in comfortable silence, or she would sit in his kennel and let him rest his head in her lap. He never asked for anything more than her presence. Sarah was impressed with Barbara's dedication. Most volunteers came once or twice and then disappeared, but Barbara showed up every single day, rain or shine. After a few weeks, Sarah started teaching her more advanced tasks: how to administer medications, how to recognize signs of illness, how to help socialize frightened or aggressive animals. "You're a natural at this," Sarah said one afternoon as they watched Barbara coax a nervous pit bull out of his kennel. The dog, named Bruno, had been rescued from a neglectful situation and was terrified of people. But somehow, Barbara had managed to earn his trust. "I'm just patient," Barbara said, keeping her voice low and calm as Bruno sniffed her hand. "That's all they need. Someone who won't rush them or force them." "It's more than that," Sarah insisted. "You have a gift. These animals sense something good in you." Barbara didn't respond. She didn't feel like she had anything good in her anymore. But if the animals couldn't see her failures, if they could look at her and see someone worth trusting, then maybe she could keep pretending a little longer. As winter turned to spring, Barbara became a fixture at the Riverside Animal Shelter. She made friends with the other volunteers: Tom, a retired firefighter who came in twice a week to do maintenance work; Julie, a high school student who helped on weekends; and Margaret, an elderly woman who fostered kittens in her home. They were good people, all of them motivated by a simple desire to help creatures who couldn't help themselves. They didn't pry into Barbara's past, and she was grateful for that. Here, she wasn't Barbara Morrison, former attorney. She was just Barbara, the woman who loved Max and always had time to walk nervous dogs. The shelter itself was struggling financially. Sarah was constantly worried about funding, often paying for supplies out of her own pocket. The building was old and in need of repairs. The heating system was unreliable, and the roof leaked when it rained hard. But despite these challenges, The shelter served an important function in the community. Every few weeks, they would hold an adoption event at the local pet store, and Barbara would help bring the animals and talk to potential adopters. It was always heartbreaking to see people walk past the older dogs in favor of puppies, but every successful adoption was a victory. In April, a small miracle happened. Max was adopted by a kind couple in their 70s who had recently lost their own golden retriever. They came to the shelter specifically looking for an older dog, and Max won them over immediately. Barbara was thrilled for him, but she also felt a deep sadness watching him leave. "You'll miss him," Sarah said gently as they watched the couple lead Max to their car. "I will," Barbara admitted. "But he deserves a real home. A family who will love him. You love him. I do. But I can't give him what they can." That night, Barbara sat in her cottage and cried for the first time since leaving Chicago. She cried for Max, for Marcus Chen, for all the things she had lost and all the mistakes she had made. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she sat in the darkness, listening to the ocean. The next morning, she went back to the shelter. There were always more animals who needed help.
Summer arrived in Riverside with warm, sunny days and cool evenings. The shelter was busier than usual, as it always was during the warmer months. People found stray animals on their properties, or kittens were born to feral cats, or families decided they couldn't take their pets on vacation and simply abandoned them. Barbara now worked at the shelter 5 days a week, sometimes more when Sarah needed extra help. She had become skilled at handling difficult animals, and Sarah increasingly relied on her judgment when making decisions about care and placement. One morning in late June, Barbara arrived at the shelter to find Sarah sitting at her desk, staring at a letter with a worried expression. "What's wrong?" Barbara asked. Sarah looked up, her face pale. "Have you heard of Grandview Development?" Barbara shook her head. "They're a big real estate company based in Portland. They buy up properties and develop them into resorts, shopping centers, that kind of thing." Sarah held up the letter. "They want to buy the land the shelter sits on." Barbara felt a chill run down her spine. "Can they do that?" "The shelter doesn't own this property. We lease it from the county. If Grandview can convince the county commission to sell, then yes, they can do it." "But where would the shelter go?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. There's no other affordable property available in town. We'd probably have to close. What would happen to the animals? I'd try to find rescue organizations to take them, but most shelters are already over capacity. Some of them." Sarah couldn't finish the sentence, but Barbara understood. Some of the animals, especially the older or less adoptable ones, would likely be euthanized. "We can't let that happen," Barbara said firmly. "I'm going to fight it," Sarah said, "but Grandview is a huge company with lots of money and lawyers. I'm just one person running a small shelter." For the first time in months, Barbara felt something other than guilt and sadness. She felt anger. These animals, who had already been abandoned and betrayed by humans, were now going to lose their only safe haven because some company wanted to make money. "You're not alone," Barbara said. "I'll help you." Over the next few weeks, they learned more about Grandview's plans. The company wanted to build a luxury resort called Ocean Vista, featuring a hotel, condominiums, restaurants, and shops. They had already purchased several properties along the coast and were working to acquire the remaining land they needed. The shelter property was crucial to their plans because of its location. It sat on a slight hill with views of both the ocean and the mountains, making it prime real estate for high-end development. Sarah organized a town meeting to discuss the issue. Barbara helped her prepare, creating flyers and calling people to encourage attendance. On the night of the meeting, held in the community center, over 200 people showed up, nearly everyone in town. Sarah stood at the front of the room and explained the situation. The Riverside Animal Shelter has served this community for 20 years, she said, her voice trembling slightly. We've found homes for thousands of animals. We've provided a safe place for pets whose owners couldn't keep them. We've rescued abandoned and abused animals. If Grandview succeeds in buying our property, all of that ends. A man in an expensive suit stood up from the back of the room. I'm Robert Harrison, Vice President of Grandview Development. I understand people's emotional attachment to the shelter, but let's talk about the bigger picture. Ocean Vista will bring jobs to Riverside. It will bring tourists who will spend money at local businesses. It will increase property values and provide tax revenue for the county. Surely that's worth more than a small animal shelter. The animals aren't worth anything? An elderly woman called out. I didn't say that, Harrison replied smoothly. But we need to balance sentiment with economic reality. Riverside is a dying town. Young people are leaving because there are no opportunities here. Ocean Vista can change that. The room erupted in arguments. Some people agreed with Harrison, excited about the possibility of economic growth. Others were firmly on the shelter's side, arguing that Riverside's charm lay in its small-town character, not in becoming another resort destination. Barbara listened to the debate, her legal training automatically analyzing the arguments. Harrison was skilled at redirecting the conversation away from the shelter and toward economic benefits. He had clearly done this before. When the meeting ended without any resolution, Barbara approached Sarah. I need to tell you something, she said. I used to be a lawyer. Sarah looked at her in surprise. Really? Why didn't you mention this before? Because I left that life behind. But if you want my help with this, really help you, then I need to use those skills again. I'll take any help I can get, Sarah said gratefully. What should we do? First, we need to understand exactly what Grandview is proposing and what legal authority they have. Then we need to find out if there are any grounds to challenge their plans. And we need to build public support, not just here in Riverside, but in the wider county. For the first time since the meeting started, Sarah smiled. I'm so glad you're here. Barbara spent the next several days researching. She went to the county offices and requested copies of all documents related to Grandview's proposal. She studied county ordinances and state laws regarding land use and development. She reached out to environmental groups who might be interested in the impact of a large resort on the local ecosystem. The more she learned, the more concerned she became. Grandview's proposal had moved through the approval process unusually quickly. Several county commissioners had voted in favor of the project without the usual environmental impact studies or public comment periods. Something wasn't right. Barbara decided to attend the next county commission meeting. She drove to the county seat an hour north of Riverside and sat in the back of the room as the commissioners discussed various items of business. When they reached the item about Grandview's proposal, Commissioner Margaret Walsh made a motion to approve the sale of the shelter property. Commissioner David Chen seconded the motion. Barbara noticed that both commissioners looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with the small group of Riverside residents who had come to observe. Before the vote could be taken, Barbara stood up. Excuse me, I have a question. The commission chairman, a heavy-set man named Robert Foster, looked annoyed. This isn't a public comment period. I understand, but as a county resident, I believe I have the right to ask questions about a significant land sale, Barbara said, her attorney voice coming back naturally. Has an environmental impact study been completed for the Ocean Vista project? That's not required at this stage, Commissioner Foster said dismissively. Actually, according to state law, any development over 20 acres near sensitive coastal areas does require an environmental study before the commission can approve a sale, Barbara countered. The Grandview project is 50 acres. The commissioners exchanged glances. We'll take that under advisement, Foster said. Now please sit down or I'll have to ask you to leave. Barbara sat, but she had made her point. Several other observers were now whispering among themselves, clearly interested in what she had said. After the meeting, Barbara waited outside the building. She watched as Commissioner Walsh emerged, looking troubled. Barbara approached her carefully. "Commissioner Walsh? I'm Barbara Morrison. I'm sorry if I caused any disruption in there, but I'm concerned about the process." Walsh looked around nervously. "I can't talk about this." "I understand, but if there's something wrong, if you're being pressured—" "Please leave me alone," Walsh said, but her voice was shaking. She hurried to her car and drove away quickly. Barbara stood in the parking lot, thinking. Walsh's reaction confirmed her suspicions. Something was definitely wrong. Over the next few weeks, Barbara dedicated herself to understanding Grandview's operations. She discovered that Ocean Vista wasn't their first project. They had developed similar resorts in 3 other small coastal towns in Oregon and Washington over the past 10 years. She contacted people in those towns and learned a disturbing pattern. In each case, Grandview had moved aggressively to acquire property, sometimes using questionable tactics. Local officials who opposed their projects often reversed their positions suddenly. Small businesses that stood in the way of development frequently faced unexpected regulatory problems or financial difficulties. One former business owner in a Washington town told Barbara, "They made me an offer for my restaurant. When I refused, I suddenly got hit with health code violations I'd never had before. My insurance premiums went up. My suppliers started having problems delivering to me. After 6 months, I couldn't afford to stay in business. I sold to Grandview for a fraction of what my restaurant was worth." "Did you ever prove they were behind these problems?" Barbara asked. "No, they're too smart for that. Everything looked legitimate on paper, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidence." Armed with this information, Barbara returned to Riverside and called a meeting with Sarah and a small group of supporters. They met in Tom's garage, sitting on folding chairs among his tools and equipment. "I think Grandview is using illegal tactics to push this project through," Barbara explained, "but I can't prove it yet. We need to be strategic about how we fight this." "What do you suggest?" Tom asked. "First, we need to slow down their timeline. The environmental impact study requirement should buy us a few months. Second, we need to dig into the county commissioners' relationships with Grandview. If any of them have received bribes or kickbacks, that could stop the project entirely. Third, we need to make this a bigger story. Right now, it's just a local issue. We need to attract media attention, maybe even state-level oversight." "That's a lot of work," Margaret said doubtfully. "How are we supposed to do all that?" "I know it seems overwhelming," Barbara acknowledged, "but we have to try. These animals are depending on us." Sarah reached over and squeezed Barbara's hand. "You've already done so much. Are you sure you want to get this deeply involved?" Barbara thought about Max, now living happily with his adopted family. She thought about Bruno, the scared pit bull who had finally learned to trust people. She thought about all the animals currently sleeping in their kennels at the shelter, unaware that their sanctuary might soon disappear. "I'm sure," she said. Part 4. Investigation. The environmental impact study requirement did slow things down, just as Barbara had hoped. Grandview had to hire consultants and conduct surveys, which would take at least 3 months. This gave the shelter supporters time to organize. Barbara threw herself into the fight with an intensity she hadn't felt since her days as a practicing attorney. Every morning, she went to the shelter to help with the animals. Every afternoon and evening, she worked on the Grandview case. She created a systematic investigation plan. First, she needed to understand the financial relationships between Grandview and the county commissioners. She filed public records requests for the commissioners' financial disclosure forms, campaign contribution records, and meeting calendars. The responses were revealing. Commissioner Foster had received substantial campaign contributions from companies that turned out to be subsidiaries of Grandview. Commissioner Chen had taken several expensive business trips to properties owned by Grandview, all paid for by the company. Commissioner Walsh's disclosure forms showed a sudden increase in personal wealth around the time she had voted in favor of Grandview's previous projects. But none of this was technically illegal. Campaign contributions were allowed. Business trips could be justified as fact-finding missions. Personal wealth increases could be explained in many ways. Barbara needed stronger evidence. She decided to focus on Robert Harrison, the Grandview vice president. She researched his background and discovered he had a reputation for aggressive business tactics. In one previous project, a whistleblower had accused him of bribery, but the case had been settled out of court with a confidentiality agreement. Barbara tracked down the whistleblower, a former Grandview employee named Patricia Reynolds, who was now living in Seattle. After several phone calls, Patricia agreed to meet with her. They met at a coffee shop near Patricia's home. She was a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed but with tired eyes that suggested she had been through difficult times. "I signed a non-disclosure agreement," Patricia said immediately. "I can't talk about specific details of the settlement." "I understand," Barbara said, "but surely there are things you can tell me in general terms. What was it like working for Grandview?" Patricia stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Harrison runs that company like his personal kingdom. He's charming when he needs to be, but underneath he's ruthless. He'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants." "Including breaking the law?" "He's very careful about that. He never does anything directly. He has people who handle the dirty work, and he makes sure there's always plausible deniability." "What about the project in Riverside? Do you know anything about it?" Patricia hesitated. "I can't talk about specific projects. But I'll say this. If Grandview wants that land, they won't stop until they get it. They're probably already working on the county commissioners, finding out what motivates them, what they want. Money, power, favors, whatever it takes." "How do they approach people?" "Carefully. Harrison usually starts with legitimate offers, business partnerships, that kind of thing. If that doesn't work, he looks for pressure points. Does the person have financial problems? Secrets they want to keep hidden? Family members who could be helped or hurt? He finds the leverage and uses it. That's extortion. Maybe, but proving it is almost impossible. Everything is done through intermediaries and shell companies. By the time you trace it back to Grandview, the trail is cold." Barbara thanked Patricia for her time and drove back to Riverside, thinking about what she had learned. If Patricia was right, then Grandview was likely already working on the commissioners, trying to ensure they had the votes they needed. She decided to take a more direct approach. Barbara called Commissioner Walsh and asked to meet with her privately. To her surprise, Walsh agreed. They met at a restaurant in a town halfway between Riverside and the county seat. Walsh arrived looking nervous, constantly glancing around as if worried about being seen. "Thank you for meeting with me," Barbara said. "I shouldn't be here," Walsh said. "If Foster finds out I'm talking to you, he'll be furious." "Why would Commissioner Foster care?" Walsh laughed bitterly. "Because he's in deep with Grandview, and he's made it clear that everyone needs to vote the right way on this project." "Is he threatening you?" "Not directly, but he doesn't have to. We all know what happens to people who get in Grandview's way." "What do you mean?" Walsh lowered her voice. 3 years ago, there was another commissioner, Bill Santos. He opposed a Grandview project. Suddenly, his daughter's application to State University was rejected, even though she had perfect grades. His wife's small business lost several major contracts. His mortgage rate mysteriously went up. Nothing that could be traced back to Grandview, but the message was clear. And what happened? Bill resigned from the commission and moved his family out of the county. Grandview got their project approved. Barbara felt a chill. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of being afraid." Walsh said, her eyes filling with tears. I became a commissioner because I wanted to help my community, not because I wanted to be part of some corrupt system. But I have 2 kids in college, and my husband just lost his job. If I vote against Grandview, I'm terrified of what might happen to my family. What if I could protect you? What if I could expose what Grandview is doing and stop them? Walsh shook her head. You can't. They're too powerful. They have lawyers and money and connections. You're just one person. I was an attorney for 25 years, Barbara said. I know how to build a case. But I need evidence. Real evidence. Emails, recorded conversations, documents. Can you help me? Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, There's a Grandview representative, a man named Vincent Cole. He's the one who handles the commissioners. He's been very clear about what he expects from us and what will happen if we don't cooperate. If you could record him saying those things, that might be the evidence you need. How can I get access to him? He's scheduled to meet with Commissioner Chen next week to discuss the environmental study. If you could somehow be there with a recording device. That's a long shot, Barbara said, but I'll figure something out. Walsh stood up to leave. Please be careful. These people are dangerous, not physically, but they can destroy your life in other ways. After Walsh left, Barbara sat alone in the restaurant thinking. She needed to record Vincent Cole making threats or offering bribes. But how could she do that without breaking the law herself? Illegal recordings wouldn't be admissible in court, and she could face criminal charges for wiretapping. She needed help from someone with experience in this kind of investigation. Barbara thought about the people she knew from her legal career. Most of them were still in Chicago, and she wasn't ready to reach out to that part of her life yet. Then she remembered James Patterson, her former mentor. Despite their parting, he had always been a man of integrity. If anyone would understand what she was trying to do and could offer advice, it would be James. Barbara called him from her car. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding surprised, but pleased to hear from her. Barbara, I've wondered how you were doing. Where are you? I'm in Oregon, a small town called Riverside. She explained the situation with the shelter and Grandview development. James listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, So you're practicing law again, just without the license. I suppose I am. But James, I need advice. I have a chance to record someone from Grandview making threats, but I don't want to do anything illegal. Oregon is a one-party consent state, James said. That means you can record a conversation as long as one party to the conversation consents. If you're part of the conversation, you can record it legally. But I'm not part of this meeting. It's between Cole and Commissioner Chen. Then you need to become part of it. Or you need Chen's cooperation to record it. Chen is in Grandview's pocket. He won't help. James thought for a moment. What if you confronted Cole publicly? At a commission meeting or some other public venue. If you engage him in conversation and record it, that would be legal. He'd never admit to anything in public. Probably not. Barbara, I have to ask, are you sure you want to do this? From what you've told me, this company plays rough. You could be putting yourself at risk. I know, but if I don't do this, the shelter will close, and those animals will have nowhere to go. I failed Marcus Chen. I can't fail them too. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, James said, Marcus Chen's case was overturned last month. New evidence came to light proving he was innocent. The real embezzler confessed. Barbara's hands began to shake. What? I'm sorry. I thought you knew. It was in all the news. Marcus was released from prison 2 weeks ago. The firm is helping him sue for wrongful conviction. He's free? Barbara could barely process what she was hearing. Yes. And Barbara, you should know that the new evidence was something you discovered during your investigation. It was in your files. The prosecutor just buried it. You were right all along. He was innocent. After the call ended, Barbara sat in her car for a long time, crying. Marcus Chen was free. He could be with his family again. His life wasn't destroyed. She hadn't failed him after all. But she had walked away. She had let her guilt consume her instead of continuing to fight for him. She had abandoned the law, abandoned her clients, abandoned everything she had worked for. And for what? To hide in a small town, caring for animals because it was easier than facing her mistakes? Number. That wasn't fair. The animals weren't a consolation prize or a way to hide. They were innocent creatures who needed help, and right now they needed her to be strong. Barbara wiped her tears and started the car. She had work to do. A pattern emerged. Cole would arrive in a town several months before Grandview made their formal proposal. He would attend local events, join community organizations, make friends with influential people. By the time Grandview announced their plans, Cole had already established relationships with the people who would be making the decisions. In Riverside's case, Cole had been making visits to the area for over a year. He had stayed at local bed and breakfasts, eaten at local restaurants, and attended town council meetings. He had presented himself as a real estate consultant, interested in the area's potential. Barbara realized that Cole was probably already well known to many people in Riverside. She began asking around discreetly, and sure enough, several people remembered him. "Oh, Vince!" "Nice guy," said Fred, the owner of the local diner. "He comes in here every few weeks, always leaves a big tip. We talk about fishing sometimes." "Has he ever mentioned Grandview Development?" Barbara asked. "Not that I recall. He said he worked in real estate, but I didn't ask for details." "Why?" "Just curious." Barbara continued her investigation, talking to more people who had interacted with Cole. Most described him the same way: friendly, generous, interested in the community. He was good at his job, making people like him before they even knew what he wanted. One evening, Barbara was having dinner at Fred's diner when Cole himself walked in. He was a tall man with an easy smile and expensive casual clothes. He greeted Fred like an old friend and took a seat at the counter. Barbara watched him carefully. He seemed completely relaxed, chatting with Fred about the weather and the fishing conditions. There was nothing in his demeanor to suggest he was the kind of person who threatened and manipulated public officials. On impulse, Barbara stood up and approached him. "Excuse me, are you Vincent Cole?" He turned to her with a polite smile. "Yes, I am. Have we met?" "No, but I've heard your name. I understand you work for Grandview Development." The smile didn't change, but something in his eyes became more guarded. "That's right. And you are?" "Barbara Morrison. I volunteer at the animal shelter." "Ah." Cole's expression became sympathetic. "I've heard about the situation with the shelter. That must be difficult." "It is. The animals will have nowhere to go if you take their land. I understand your concern. I really do. But sometimes we have to think about the greater good. Ocean Vista will benefit the entire community." "Will it? Or will it just benefit Grandview?" Cole's smile remained, but his voice took on a slightly harder edge. "Miss Morrison, I respect your passion for the animals, but economic development is necessary for this town's survival. I hope you can understand that." "No, but I've heard your name. I understand you work for Grandview Development." The smile didn't change, but something in his eyes became more guarded. "That's right. And you are?" "Barbara Morrison. I volunteer at the animal shelter." "Ah." Cole's expression became sympathetic. "I've heard about the situation with the shelter. That must be difficult." "It is. The animals will have nowhere to go if you take their land. I understand your concern. I really do. But sometimes we have to think about the greater good. Ocean Vista will benefit the entire community. Will it? Or will it just benefit Grandview?" Cole's smile remained, but his voice took on a slightly harder edge. "Miss Morrison, I respect your passion for the animals. But economic development is necessary for this town's survival. I hope you can understand that. I understand that you're very good at getting what you want, Mr. Cole. I've researched your previous projects. Now the smile faded entirely. Then you know that Grandview completes successful developments that benefit everyone involved. If you'll excuse me, I need to finish my dinner. He turned back to his meal, effectively dismissing her. Barbara returned to her table, her heart pounding. She had confronted him, but to what end? He hadn't said anything incriminating. He had been perfectly polite and professional. But she had gotten under his skin just a little, and more importantly, he now knew who she was. That might be useful later. The next day, Barbara received a phone call from Sarah. You need to come to the shelter right away. Something's happened. Barbara drove to the shelter quickly, worried that one of the animals was sick or injured. But when she arrived, she found Sarah standing in the parking lot with a county health inspector. What's going on? Barbara asked. The health inspector, a young woman with a clipboard, said, We received a complaint about unsanitary conditions. I'm conducting an inspection. We've never had a complaint before, Sarah said, looking distressed. We were just inspected 3 months ago and passed with no issues. Well, someone filed a complaint, so I have to check it out, the inspector said, not unkindly. It's probably nothing, but it's procedure. The inspection took 2 hours. The inspector examined every kennel, every storage area, every inch of the facility. She took photos, made notes, and asked questions about their cleaning procedures, medical protocols, and record keeping. Finally, she said, I'm going to have to write you up for several violations. The kennels don't meet current spacing requirements. Your medical supply storage doesn't have proper temperature controls, and your waste disposal procedures need to be updated. But we've always done it this way, Sarah protested. No one ever said anything before. The regulations were updated last year. You should have received notification. We didn't receive anything. The inspector shrugged. Well, regardless, you need to fix these issues within 30 days or we'll have to suspend your operating license. After she left, Sarah sank into a chair, looking defeated. This is going to cost thousands of dollars. Money we don't have. How are we supposed to upgrade everything in 30 days? Barbara felt a cold fury building inside her. This is Cole. I confronted him yesterday at the diner. This is his way of sending a message. You think he filed the complaint? I'd bet anything on it. And I'm sure if we look into it, we'll find that the updated regulations were conveniently made stricter just in time to cause us problems. What do? We fight back. But first, we need money. Can you organize a fundraiser? I can try, but 30 days isn't much time. Over the next 2 weeks, the small community of Riverside came together in a way Barbara had never seen before. Sarah organized a benefit dinner at the community center. Local businesses donated items for a silent auction. The high school band performed at a fundraising concert. Julie, the teenage volunteer, even set up a crowdfunding page online that attracted donations from across the state. Barbara worked alongside everyone else, but she was also continuing her investigation. She filed another round of public records requests, this time focusing on the health department. She wanted to know exactly when the regulations had been updated and who had filed the complaint against the shelter. The responses were enlightening. The regulations had indeed been updated the previous year, but the notification process had been poorly handled. Many facilities, including the shelter, had never received proper notice. As for the complaint, it had been filed anonymously through an online form. Barbara suspected that Cole or someone working for him had filed it, but she couldn't prove it. The anonymity of the online system made it impossible to trace. However, she did discover something interesting. The health department's budget had recently received a substantial increase from a private donation by the Grandview Foundation, a charitable organization funded by Grandview Development. It wasn't proof of corruption, but it was suggestive. Grandview was making friends in the county health department, just as they had with the county commission. The fundraiser was successful, raising enough money to make most of the required upgrades. Tom and several other volunteers did the construction work for free, putting in long hours to rebuild kennels and install new equipment. On the 29th day, the health inspector returned for a follow-up visit. She seemed genuinely pleased to see all the improvements. "This is excellent work," she said. "You're now in full compliance." "Thank you," Sarah said, exhausted but relieved. As the inspector was leaving, Barbara asked, "Out of curiosity, how often do you get anonymous complaints?" "Not very often. Maybe a few times a year." "And do you always inspect based on anonymous complaints?" The inspector hesitated. "Usually we like to have some verification first. But in this case, I was told to prioritize it." "Who told you to prioritize it?" "My supervisor, but I don't know why. Maybe there was pressure from higher up." After she left, Barbara added this information to her growing file. The pattern was becoming clearer. Grandview was using their influence and resources to create problems for the shelter, trying to make it so difficult and expensive to operate that Sarah would have no choice but to give up. But they had underestimated the community's determination to save the shelter, and they had definitely underestimated Barbara. Part 6. The Environmental Study. In early August, Grandview submitted their environmental impact study to the county commission. It was a thick document, full of technical language and scientific data, concluding that the Ocean Vista project would have minimal negative impact on the local environment. Barbara obtained a copy and spent several days reading through it. She had no training in environmental science, but her legal background had taught her how to analyze complex documents and spot inconsistencies. The study seemed thorough at first glance, but as Barbara dug deeper, she found problems. The consultants who had conducted the study had used outdated data in some places. They had underestimated the impact on local water resources. They had failed to adequately address how construction would affect wildlife habitats. Most concerning, they had completely dismissed concerns about the impact on the marine environment. The Ocean Vista project would involve significant construction along the coastline, yet the study barely mentioned the potential effects on the ocean ecosystem. Barbara remembered that Dorothy at the library had mentioned local history books. She went back to the library and searched for information about Riverside's coastal environment. What she found was fascinating. The stretch of coastline near the shelter was home to several species of seabirds that nested on the cliffs. It was also a known habitat for sea lions during certain times of the year. These facts should have been major considerations in any environmental study, but Grandview's consultants had either overlooked them or deliberately ignored them. Armed with this information, Barbara reached out to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. She spoke with a biologist named Dr. Ellen Martinez, who specialized in coastal ecosystems. "I'm not surprised the study missed these issues," Dr. Martinez said when Barbara explained the situation. "Private consultants hired by developers have a tendency to produce findings that favor their clients. It's not technically fraud, but it's not good science either. Is there anything that can be done? If there are protected species in the area, that changes everything. Federal and state laws require additional studies and permits. I'd need to visit the site to verify what's actually there. Would you be willing to do that?" "Absolutely. This is exactly the kind of situation where independent oversight is crucial." Dr. Martinez came to Riverside the following week. Barbara met her at the shelter, and they walked along the coastal cliffs together. It didn't take long to find evidence of seabird nesting sites. They also observed sea lions on the rocks below. "This is significant," Dr. Martinez said, taking photographs and notes. "Several of these bird species are protected under state law. The sea lions are federally protected. Any development that might disturb their habitats requires additional permits and much more rigorous environmental review. Will you write a report? Better than that. I'll file a formal objection to the county commission. the state will have to get involved, and that will delay the project significantly. Possibly kill it entirely if Grandview can't get the necessary permits. Barbara felt a surge of hope. How long will this process take? Months, possibly years, and there's no guarantee Grandview will get approved even if they do all the required studies. Projects like this get rejected all the time when protected species are involved. Thank you, Barbara said. You have no idea what this means. I'm just doing my job. But I'll tell you something. I've seen too many beautiful coastal areas destroyed by overdevelopment. If I can help prevent that here, I'm happy to do it. When Barbara told Sarah and the other volunteers about Dr. Martinez's findings, they were ecstatic. For the first time, it seemed like they might actually win this fight. But their celebration was premature. 2 days later, Sarah received a certified letter from Grandview's lawyers. It was a cease and desist order, demanding that she stop making false and defamatory statements about their company. The letter claimed that Sarah had been spreading lies about Grandview's business practices and threatening legal action if she didn't publicly retract her statements. I haven't said anything false, Sarah said, showing the letter to Barbara. Everything I've said about them is true. They know that, Barbara said, reading through the legal jargon. This is a SLAPP suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're trying to intimidate you into silence. What should I do? Ignore it. They're counting on you being scared of lawyers and lawsuits. But you have the truth on your side, and you have the right to speak out about matters of public concern. What if they actually sue me? Then we fight it. I'll help you. Barbara paused, then added, In fact, I think it's time I started practicing law again. Sarah looked at her in surprise. Can you do that? Don't you need to be licensed in Oregon? I can apply for admission to the Oregon bar based on my Illinois license. It will take a few months, but in the meantime, I can work under the supervision of a local attorney. Do you know any local attorneys? Not yet. But I'll find one. Barbara spent the next day making phone calls to attorneys in the surrounding area. Most were either too busy or not interested in taking on a case against a large corporation. Finally, she found a solo practitioner named Michael Chen who agreed to meet with her. Michael's office was in a small town 20 miles from Riverside. He was in his early 40s, with graying hair and a friendly demeanor. When Barbara explained the situation, he listened carefully. I know Grandview, he said when she finished. They developed a resort near here a few years ago. A lot of local people were unhappy about it, but they had good lawyers and deep pockets. They got what they wanted. So, you won't help us? I didn't say that. Michael smiled. I said they have good lawyers. But that doesn't mean they're invincible. If you've found evidence of protected species and irregularities in the environmental study, that's significant. And if you can prove they're using corrupt practices to influence county officials, that could stop them entirely. I have evidence of suspicious behavior, but nothing definite. Not yet. Then we need to get definite evidence. The cease and desist letter is actually helpful in a way. It shows they're worried about what you're uncovering. They wouldn't bother trying to silence you if you weren't a threat. Will you supervise me while I work on this case? Under one condition. I want to be co-counsel. This sounds like an interesting fight, and I've been looking for a good cause to support. Barbara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone anymore. Thank you, Michael. Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Over the next several weeks, Barbara and Michael worked together to build their case. Michael handled the official legal filings, while Barbara continued her investigation. They filed a motion to intervene in the County Commission's proceedings regarding the Ocean Vista project, arguing that the environmental study was inadequate and that the Commission was acting improperly. They also filed a complaint with the State Ethics Commission, alleging that several county commissioners had conflicts of interest regarding Grandview. Vincent Cole responded by escalating his pressure campaign. The shelter faced a sudden increase in nuisance complaints from anonymous sources. Someone filed a noise complaint about the dogs barking. Someone else complained about the smell. The county sent inspectors to investigate each complaint, creating constant disruption. Local businesses that supported the shelter started experiencing problems too. The diner where Fred worked received a surprise tax audit. Tom's construction business was suddenly unable to get permits approved for new projects. Margaret's home, where she fostered kittens, was cited for zoning violations. The message was clear: support the shelter and you'll pay the price. But instead of intimidating people, these tactics made them angry. More and more residents began speaking out against Grandview. The local newspaper ran a series of articles questioning the company's methods. People who had been on the fence about Ocean Vista started to oppose it. The tide was turning, but slowly. In October, the county commission held a public hearing on the environmental study. The hearing room was packed with people from Riverside and surrounding communities. Dr. Martinez presented her findings about the protected species. Barbara and Michael presented evidence of irregularities in the study. Several residents spoke about their concerns regarding overdevelopment. On the other side, Grandview brought in their own experts who disputed Dr. Martinez's conclusions. Robert Harrison gave an emotional speech about the economic benefits of Ocean Vista. Vincent Cole sat in the front row, taking notes and whispering to the commissioners. The hearing lasted for 6 hours. At the end, Commissioner Foster announced that the commission would take the matter under advisement and vote at their next meeting in 2 weeks. As people filed out of the hearing room, Barbara found herself face to face with Vincent Cole in the hallway. "You're making a mistake, Ms. Morrison," he said quietly. "Am I?" "I think I'm doing exactly what I should be doing. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. Grandview doesn't lose. There's a first time for everything." Cole stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I know about you. I know you were a lawyer in Chicago. I know about Marcus Chen's case. I know you left because you couldn't handle the guilt of losing." Barbara felt her blood run cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's not relevant to this situation." "Isn't it? You failed once before. You let an innocent man go to prison. What makes you think you won't fail these animals too?" "Because I'm not going to give up this time." Cole smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Everyone gives up eventually, Ms. Morrison. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point." He walked away, leaving Barbara standing in the hallway, shaking with anger and fear. Cole had just made a veiled threat, but he had done it in a way that could never be proven. There were too many people around, and his words could be interpreted as simple conversation. But Barbara understood the message. Cole knew her history, and he would use it against her if necessary. That night, Barbara called Michael and told him about the encounter. "That's interesting," Michael said thoughtfully. "He wouldn't bother threatening you unless he was genuinely worried. Or maybe he's just trying to intimidate me. Maybe. But I think there's more to it. He mentioned specific details about your past. That means he's done research on you, which means he sees you as a serious threat. So what do? We keep pushing, and we prepare for whatever they throw at us next." Part 7. Breaking Point. The next 2 weeks were intense. Barbara and Michael prepared for the county commission vote, reaching out to supporters and organizing a demonstration outside the county building. They also worked with Dr. Martinez to file a formal complaint with the State Environmental Agency, requesting a full review of the Ocean Vista project. Meanwhile, the pressure campaign against Barbara and her allies intensified. Barbara's landlord suddenly decided to sell the cottage she was renting, giving her 30 days to find a new place. Sarah received notification that the shelter's liability insurance was being canceled due to increased risk. Tom's construction business lost 3 major contracts in 1 week. The most troubling incident occurred on a Sunday morning. Barbara arrived at the shelter to find that someone had cut the locks on several kennels during the night. 4 dogs had escaped, including a young husky named Luna, who was terrified of strangers. Sarah was in tears as she called Barbara. "I don't know how this happened. The gates were secure when I left last night. Someone must have done this deliberately." Barbara and a group of volunteers spent the entire day searching for the missing dogs. They found 3 of them within a few hours, scared but unharmed. But Luna was still missing as darkness fell. "We'll keep looking tomorrow," Barbara said, though her heart was heavy. Luna had been at the shelter for only 2 weeks, rescued from an abusive situation. If she was out there alone, terrified and confused, she might never trust humans again, if they found her at all. That night, Barbara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Luna, about the vindictiveness of whoever had released the dogs, about the mounting pressure from Grandview. She thought about walking away, about how much easier her life would be if she just gave up on this fight. But then she thought about all the animals she had helped over the past months. The scared dogs who had learned to trust. The injured cats who had healed. The countless creatures who had found new homes because the shelter existed. She couldn't let them down. At dawn, Barbara was back out searching for Luna. She walked through the woods near the shelter, calling the dog's name, listening for any sound of movement in the underbrush. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, burning off the morning mist. Barbara's feet ached, and her throat was sore from calling out. She was about to take a break when she heard a faint whimpering sound. Following the sound, Barbara found Luna wedged under a fallen log, shaking with fear. The dog had apparently tried to crawl under it and gotten stuck. "It's okay, sweetie," Barbara said softly, approaching slowly. "I'm here to help you." Luna whimpered again but didn't try to run. Very carefully, Barbara worked to free the dog from under the log. It took 20 minutes of patient work, but finally Luna was free. Barbara expected the dog to bolt, but instead, Luna collapsed against her, trembling. Barbara held her close, feeling the rapid beating of the dog's heart. "You're safe now," Barbara whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." As she carried Luna back to the shelter, Barbara realized something. This was why she was fighting. Not because she was trying to redeem herself for past failures, not because she was looking for a second chance, but because these animals needed someone who wouldn't give up on them, no matter how hard things got. She had given up on Marcus Chen, walking away when things got difficult, but she wouldn't make that mistake again. The incident with the released dogs made the local news. The reporter interviewed Sarah, who didn't accuse Grandview directly, but made it clear she believed the incident was deliberate harassment. "Someone wants us to close," Sarah said on camera. "They want us to give up and go away." "But we're not going to do that. These animals depend on us, and we're going to keep fighting for them." The story generated a wave of sympathy and support. Donations poured in. More volunteers signed up to help. People who had been neutral on the Ocean Vista issue began to speak out against Grandview. Robert Harrison released a statement denying any involvement in the incident and expressing sympathy for the shelter. But the damage to Grandview's reputation had been done. The day of the county commission vote arrived. Barbara, Michael, Sarah, and dozens of supporters gathered outside the county building, holding signs and chanting. Media crews from several regional news stations were present, covering the story. Inside, the commission chambers were standing room only. Barbara and Michael sat in the front row, their legal briefs prepared. Dr. Martinez was present, ready to answer any questions about the environmental issues. Commissioner Walsh sat at the commission table, looking pale and nervous. Commissioner Foster called the meeting to order and immediately moved to the vote on the Ocean Vista project. "Before we vote, does anyone have any final comments?" Foster asked. Michael stood up. Commissioners, we've submitted extensive evidence showing that the environmental impact study for this project is inadequate. We've demonstrated the presence of protected species that require additional review. We've raised serious concerns about the process by which this project has been pushed through. We urge you to delay this vote until these issues can be properly addressed. Your concerns have been noted, Foster said dismissively. Any other comments? Barbara stood up. I have something to say. Foster looked annoyed. Ms. Morrison, you're not a registered speaker for this meeting. I'm co-counsel on this case, and I have the right to address this commission, unless you want to add denial of due process to the growing list of irregularities in this proceeding. Foster hesitated, then nodded grudgingly. Make it brief.
Barbara took a deep breath. Commissioners, I used to be an attorney in Chicago. I practiced law for 25 years. I worked with powerful clients and handled complex cases. But I left that career because I made a mistake. I let an innocent man down because I wasn't willing to fight hard enough when the odds were against me. She paused, making eye contact with each commissioner. I came to Riverside to escape that failure. I thought I could hide here, work with animals, and forget about the past. But this fight with Grandview has taught me something important. Sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. Sometimes you have to stand up to powerful people and organizations, even when you're afraid. Ms. Morrison, we don't need your life story, Foster interrupted.
You need to hear this, Barbara said firmly, because I believe that some of you are in the same position I was in. You know that approving this project is wrong. You know that Grandview has used questionable tactics to get to this point. You know that the environmental study is flawed. But you're afraid of standing up to them. She looked directly at Commissioner Walsh. I understand that fear. I understand the pressure you're under, but I'm asking you to find the courage to do the right thing. These animals can't advocate for themselves. This community needs you to be their voice. The room was silent. Commissioner Walsh was staring at her hands, her face flushed. Commissioner Chen looked uncomfortable. Even Foster seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, Foster said, Thank you, Miss Morrison. Now, if there are no other comments, I move that we vote on the proposal to sell the county property to Grandview Development. Wait. It was Commissioner Walsh, her voice barely audible. I have something to say. Foster's expression darkened. Margaret, we've already discussed this. I don't care what we discussed. Walsh's voice grew stronger. I've been silent too long. I've gone along with things I knew were wrong because I was afraid. But I'm done being afraid. She stood up, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. I received a call from Vincent Cole 2 weeks ago. He told me that if I voted against the Ocean Vista project, he would make sure my daughter's scholarship application was rejected. He said my husband would have trouble finding work. He said there would be consequences for my family. That's a serious allegation, Foster said. Do you have proof? I recorded the conversation. Walsh pulled out her phone. I know it might not be admissible in court, but the people of this county have a right to know what Grandview has been doing. She pressed play, and Vincent Cole's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable, making thinly veiled threats about what would happen if Walsh voted the wrong way. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Robert Harrison stood up, his face red. This is outrageous. That recording was made without consent. It's illegal. Actually, it's not, Michael said calmly. Oregon is a one-party consent state. Commissioner Walsh had every right to record that conversation. Foster tried to regain control. This is highly irregular. I move that we table this matter until... No. It was Commissioner Chen speaking for the first time. We need to vote now, and I'm voting no. I won't support this project after hearing that. Foster glared at him. David, think about what you're doing. I have thought about it. I'm voting no. One by one, the other commissioners cast their votes. When it was done, The result was 4 votes against, 2 in favor. The Ocean Vista project was rejected. The room erupted in cheers. Barbara felt tears streaming down her face. Sarah hugged her tightly. Michael was grinning, pumping his fist in the air. But Barbara's attention was on Vincent Cole, who was standing near the back of the room. Their eyes met, and she saw pure hatred in his gaze. This wasn't over. She knew that. Still, for this moment, they had won. The victory at the county commission was major, but Barbara knew better than to celebrate too much. Companies like Grandview didn't give up easily. They would appeal, they would file lawsuits, they would look for other ways to get what they wanted. Sure enough, 2 days after the vote, Grandview filed a lawsuit against the county, claiming that the commission had acted improperly by considering Walsh's recording. They also filed a separate lawsuit against Commissioner Walsh personally, seeking damages for defamation. Barbara and Michael prepared to defend against both suits. They also filed a countersuit against Grandview, alleging a pattern of corruption and intimidation. The legal battle dragged on for months. Both sides filed motions, took depositions, and gathered evidence. The media coverage intensified, with reporters from across the state following the story. During this time, the shelter continued its work. The publicity from the Grandview fight had actually been beneficial, bringing in more donations and volunteers than ever before. They were able to make additional improvements to the facility and expand their capacity.
Barbara officially applied for admission to the Oregon Bar. While waiting for approval, she continued working with Michael on the Grandview case. She also began helping other individuals and small organizations who were dealing with similar battles against large corporations. In February, nearly a year after Barbara had first arrived in Riverside, she received notification that Marcus Chen's wrongful conviction lawsuit had been settled. The state had agreed to pay him $5 million in compensation. Marcus had also sent her a personal letter. "Dear Ms. Morrison," the letter read, "I learned that you left your practice after my conviction. I want you to know that I never blamed you for what happened. You believed in me when no one else did, and you fought for me as hard as you could. The system failed us both, but you didn't fail me. I hope you found peace wherever you are. With gratitude, Marcus Chen." Barbara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She had spent a year carrying the weight of her perceived failure, only to learn that the person she thought she had failed didn't see it that way at all. She wrote back to Marcus, telling him about Riverside and the shelter, about her new life and the work she was doing. She thanked him for his forgiveness and wished him well. In March, Barbara received her Oregon bar license. She officially became co-counsel with Michael on the Grandview case, no longer working under his supervision, but as an equal partner. The case went to trial in April. It was a complex proceeding involving multiple claims and counterclaims. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with both sides presenting extensive evidence and expert testimony. Barbara took the lead on examining Vincent Cole, who had been called as a witness. She spent 2 full days questioning him, methodically walking through each instance of intimidation and corruption. Cole was a skilled witness, deflecting and denying wherever possible. But Barbara had done her homework. She had records, recordings, and testimony from multiple witnesses. The most powerful moment came when she played Commissioner Walsh's recording of Cole's threats, right there in open court. The jury's reaction was visible. Several jurors looked disgusted. One shook his head in disbelief. "Mr. Cole," Barbara said after the recording finished playing, "do you still maintain that you never threatened Commissioner Walsh?" "I was merely having a conversation about the potential economic impacts of the decision," Cole said smoothly. "Really?" "Because to me, and I suspect to this jury, it sounds like you were threatening her family if she didn't vote the way you wanted. I was sharing information she had a right to know." Information about how your company would target her daughter's scholarship application? Information about how her husband would mysteriously be unable to find work? That kind of information? Cole's lawyer objected, but the point had been made. The jury had heard Cole's own words, and no amount of legal maneuvering could erase that. The trial also featured testimony from Patricia Reynolds, the former Grandview employee who had settled a previous whistleblower case. Though she couldn't discuss the specifics of her settlement, she was able to describe the general culture at Grandview and Cole's methods. Mr. Cole's job was to remove obstacles, Patricia testified. If there was a person or organization standing in the way of a project, he was expected to find a way to neutralize them. Sometimes that meant offering money. Sometimes it meant finding leverage to pressure them. And sometimes it meant making their lives difficult until they gave up. Robert Harrison also testified, maintaining that he knew nothing about Cole's tactics and that any improper behavior was Cole's alone. But under cross-examination, Barbara was able to show that Harrison had approved the budgets for Cole's activities and had received regular reports on his progress. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for 2 days before reaching a verdict. Grandview Development was found liable for corruption, intimidation, and violation of ethics laws. They were ordered to pay $2 million in damages to the county and $1 million to Commissioner Walsh. Additionally, the judge imposed sanctions against the company, barring them from conducting business in the county for 5 years. Vincent Cole was found personally liable for his actions and was ordered to pay additional damages. He resigned from Grandview the next day and, according to rumors, had difficulty finding work elsewhere in the industry. The victory was sweet, but Barbara knew it was only one battle. Grandview would likely appeal, though the strength of the evidence made success unlikely. More importantly, there were hundreds of other companies like Grandview out there, using similar tactics in other communities. But at least in Riverside, the animals were safe. In the months following the trial, life in Riverside gradually returned to normal. The shelter continued its work, now with better facilities and more resources than ever. Sarah was able to hire 2 additional staff members, allowing the shelter to expand its services. Barbara continued working with Michael, and they decided to make their partnership official. They opened a small practice together, focusing on public interest law and helping individuals and organizations fight against powerful corporations. Their first major case after Grandview was representing a group of fishermen whose livelihoods were threatened by pollution from a manufacturing plant. Then they helped a woman whose small business had been forced out by a large chain store using questionable tactics. Then they took on a case involving a school district that was being pressured to sell valuable land to developers. Each case was different, but they all had one thing in common: people who needed someone to stand up for them against those with more money and power. Barbara found this work deeply satisfying in a way her previous career had never been. She wasn't defending wealthy clients or helping corporations navigate regulations anymore. She was using her skills to help people who couldn't help themselves. She also remained heavily involved with the shelter. She still volunteered several times a week, walking dogs and socializing cats. She had become one of Sarah's most trusted advisors, helping with major decisions and lending her legal expertise when needed. In June, the shelter held a celebration marking 1 year since the county commission vote that had saved them. The event was held on the shelter grounds, with food, music, and adoption specials. Barbara stood to the side, watching people interact with the animals, seeing families fall in love with dogs and cats who would soon have new homes. Dorothy from the library approached her, holding a glass of lemonade. "You should be proud of yourself," she said. "You saved this place." "It wasn't just me," Barbara replied. "It was the whole community." "True, but you led the fight. Without you, the shelter would be gone, and this would all be condominiums." Barbara thought about that. A year ago, She had been a broken woman, running from her past and consumed by guilt. She had come to Riverside looking for escape, not purpose. But somehow she had found both. "I saved myself," Barbara said quietly. "The shelter just gave me a reason to fight." As the celebration continued, Sarah called everyone to attention. "I want to thank you all for coming today and for your support over the past year. This shelter exists because of this community's love for animals and willingness to stand up for what's right." She paused, looking emotional. "I also want to recognize someone special." Barbara Morrison came to Riverside as a volunteer, but she became so much more. She became our champion, our advocate, and our friend. "Barbara, would you come up here?" Barbara walked to the front, feeling embarrassed by the attention. Sarah continued. "The shelter's board of directors has decided to name our new education building in your honor. We're calling it the Morrison Center for Animal Welfare. It's where we'll teach people about responsible pet ownership, where we'll train volunteers, and where we'll help connect animals with their forever families." Barbara was speechless. The crowd applauded, and several people were crying. Sarah hugged her tightly. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for everything." That evening, after the celebration ended and everyone had gone home, Barbara stayed behind to help clean up. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, she stood at the fence and watched the animals settling in for the night. A new dog had arrived that afternoon, a scared pit bull mix who cowered in the corner of his kennel. Barbara walked over to his enclosure and sat down outside it, not going in, just letting him get used to her presence. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "I know you're scared. I know things have been hard for you, but you're safe now. I promise." The dog looked at her with wary eyes, but he stopped cowering. That was progress. Barbara pulled out her phone and called James Patterson. He answered on the second ring. "Barbara, how are you? I saw the news about the trial. Congratulations." "Thanks, James. How's Chicago?" "Same as always. Cold in winter, hot in summer, and too busy in between. But I'm not calling about Chicago. I actually wanted to talk to you about something." "What is it?" "Marcus Chen stopped by the office last week. He wanted me to thank you on his behalf. He said you wrote him a letter." "I did. I needed him to know how sorry I was." "He's not looking for apologies, Barbara. He wanted me to tell you that he thinks what you're doing in Oregon is important. He said if you ever need any help, financial or otherwise, he wants to be there for you." Barbara felt tears welling up. "That's very kind of him." "It is. But I'm also calling for another reason. I'm getting old, Barbara. I'm thinking about retiring in the next few years, and I need to start planning for succession. I know you're happy in Oregon, but I want you to know that there's always a place for you here if you want to come back." "I appreciate that, James. But I think my place is here now. I'm doing work that matters." "You always did work that mattered. You were one of the best attorneys I ever trained." "Maybe. But I'm a better person now than I was then. I'm helping people who really need it, not just people who can afford it." James was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm happy for you. You found your calling." After hanging up, Barbara sat outside the new dog's kennel for another hour, just being present. Eventually, the dog moved closer to the fence, close enough that she could reach through and touch his head. He flinched at first, then relaxed into her touch. "That's it," Barbara said softly. "You're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay." Autumn came to Riverside again, bringing cooler temperatures and the first rains of the season. Barbara had now been in town for nearly 2 years, and it felt more like home than Chicago ever had. Her law practice with Michael was thriving. They had won several significant cases and developed a reputation as attorneys who would take on difficult fights against powerful opponents. They weren't getting rich, but they were making enough to live comfortably and to do work they believed in. The shelter was doing better than ever. They had achieved a placement rate of over 90%, meaning that nearly every animal who came through their doors found a home. The Morrison Center for Animal Welfare was hosting regular classes and events, bringing in people from across the region. Barbara still volunteered at the shelter regularly. It remained her favorite part of each week. The work was simple and honest, requiring nothing more than showing up and being present for creatures who needed care. On a rainy October afternoon, Barbara was at the shelter when a county sheriff's vehicle pulled up. She felt a moment of concern, but then she recognized the deputy getting out. It was Officer Mike Rodriguez, a friend of Tom's who sometimes brought stray animals to the shelter. "Hey, Barbara," Mike called out, walking to the back of his vehicle. "Got something for you?" He opened the back and carefully lifted out a cardboard box. Inside were 6 tiny puppies, maybe 3 weeks old. "Where did you find them?" Barbara asked, peering at the puppies. "On the side of Route 101. Someone just dumped them there. If a driver hadn't spotted them, they wouldn't have lasted long in this weather." Barbara felt the familiar anger at human cruelty, but she pushed it aside. The puppies needed help, not her rage at whoever had abandoned them. She took the box carefully. "We'll take care of them. Thanks for bringing them in." After Mike left, Barbara brought the puppies inside and got them settled in the nursery area. They were cold and hungry, but otherwise seemed healthy. She prepared formula and spent the next hour feeding them, one by one. Sarah came in while she was working. "New arrivals?" "Dumped on the highway. They're lucky someone found them." Sarah shook her head sadly. "I'll never understand how people can do that." "Me neither. But at least these little ones will be okay." They worked together to get the puppies settled, creating a warm nest for them with heating pads and blankets. The puppies huddled together, their tiny bodies relaxing now that they were safe and fed. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said after a while. "I've been offered a job." Barbara looked up in surprise. "What kind of job?" "The state wants me to head up their animal welfare program. It's a big position, working with shelters across Oregon to improve standards and increase funding. It's an amazing opportunity." "That's wonderful, Sarah." "You'd be great at it." "I know, but it means I'd have to leave the shelter, and I don't know if I can do that. This place is my life." Barbara sat down on a bench, thinking, "You built something incredible here, Sarah. But maybe it's time to think bigger. If you take this job, you could help dozens of shelters, thousands of animals. But what about Riverside? Who would run this shelter? There are good people here who could take over, or ... quote. Barbara paused, an idea forming. "What if I did it?" "You?" "But you're an attorney. You have your practice with Michael." "I could do both. Michael and I could adjust our schedule. And honestly, this is where my heart is. I love the legal work, but I love the shelter too. Why not combine them? I could run the shelter and provide legal advocacy for animal welfare issues." Sarah looked at her with tears in her eyes. "Are you serious?" "Completely. You should take that state job. You'll change animal welfare across the entire state, and I'll make sure the shelter you built continues your work." They talked late into the evening, planning and dreaming. Sarah would take the state position but remain on the shelter's board. Barbara would become the new director, restructuring her legal practice to accommodate the additional responsibilities. They would hire more staff, expand their programs, and turn the Riverside Animal Shelter into a model that other communities could follow. 3 months later, in January, the transition was complete. Sarah moved to the state capital to start her new job. Barbara officially took over as shelter director while continuing to work with Michael on select legal cases. The shelter board supported her vision of combining animal care with legal advocacy. They began offering free legal advice to people facing animal-related issues, helped draft better local animal welfare ordinances, and worked with law enforcement to prosecute animal cruelty cases more effectively. Barbara also started a program to help people keep their pets when they faced financial difficulties. Too often, people surrendered animals they loved simply because they couldn't afford vet care or food. The shelter now provided assistance in these situations, keeping families together instead of adding to the shelter population. The work was demanding, often requiring 60 or 70 hours per week. But Barbara had never been happier. She woke up each morning with a sense of purpose, knowing that her work made a tangible difference. She thought often about Marcus Chen and the guilt that had driven her to Riverside. She understood now that she had been carrying not just guilt over his case, but a deeper dissatisfaction with her entire career. She had spent 25 years working within a system that too often valued winning over justice, money over compassion, and professional success over personal fulfillment. The failure of Marcus Chen's case had been a symptom, not the cause, of her unhappiness. It had simply brought to the surface feelings she had been suppressing for years. Riverside had given her the space to heal and the opportunity to rebuild her life on a foundation that felt authentic. The animals had taught her about resilience, about trust despite betrayal, about the capacity to love even after being hurt. And the fight against Grandview had taught her that she could use her skills and training for something that truly mattered.
Spring arrived, bringing longer days and warmer weather. The shelter was bustling with activity. Kitten season was in full swing, and they were caring for dozens of young cats in various foster homes. One afternoon in April, Barbara was in her office doing paperwork when one of the volunteers knocked on her door. "Barbara, there's someone here to see you." "Who is it?" "He said his name is Marcus Chen." Barbara's heart skipped a beat. She walked out to the lobby, and there he was, Marcus Chen, the man whose case had changed the trajectory of her life. He looked good, healthy, and relaxed in a way he had never looked during his trial. He smiled when he saw her. "Miss Morrison, it's good to finally meet you in person, outside of a courtroom." "Marcus, I can't believe you're here. How did you find me?" "Your former colleague, James Patterson, told me where you were. I hope it's okay that I came." "Of course it's okay. Come in, please." They sat in her office, and for a few minutes, they just looked at each other. Two people whose lives had been intertwined by circumstance and tragedy, and ultimately, redemption. "I got your letter," Marcus said. "The one you sent after my conviction was overturned. I wanted to respond in person, but it took me a while to work up the courage to come." "You don't need courage to talk to me, Marcus. If anything, I'm the one who owes you an apology." "No," he said firmly. "You don't owe me anything. You believed in me when everyone else thought I was guilty. You fought for me with everything you had. The system failed us both, but you never failed me. I left. After your conviction, I just walked away. I abandoned you. You didn't abandon me. You broke under an impossible burden. I don't blame you for that. Hell, I would have broken too if I'd been in your position." Barbara felt tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry you spent time in prison for something you didn't do. I'm sorry your family had to go through that. I know. But it's over now. I'm free. I have my life back. And in a strange way, the whole experience taught me something valuable. It taught me about the fragility of justice, about how easily innocent people can be caught up in a system that's supposed to protect them. That's why I'm here, actually." "What do you mean?" Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. I received a substantial settlement from the state for my wrongful conviction. More money than I'll probably ever need. My wife and I have been talking about what to do with it, and we decided we want to use it to help others. He handed Barbara the folder. Inside were incorporation papers for a new foundation, the Chen Foundation for Legal Justice. We're creating a foundation to provide free legal representation to people who have been wrongly accused of crimes, Marcus explained. We'll hire attorneys, pay for investigators, and cover all the costs of defense. No one should have to go through what I went through without having someone fight for them the way you fought for me. Barbara looked up at him, overwhelmed. Marcus, this is incredible. There's more. We want you to be on our board of directors. You'd help us select cases, train attorneys, develop policies. You'd be perfect for it. I don't know what to say. Say yes. You told me in your letter that you're doing important work here with the animals. I'm not asking you to give that up, but this foundation could use your expertise and your experience. You could help us make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to others. Barbara thought about it. The foundation would be in Chicago, which meant she'd have to travel there regularly. But Michael could handle the Oregon cases when she was away, and this was an opportunity to make a difference on a scale she had never imagined. Yes, she said. I'll do it. Marcus grinned. Excellent. I was hoping you'd say that. They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing the foundation's plans. Marcus had thought everything through carefully. They would start small, taking on just a few cases at a time, but with the goal of eventually expanding nationwide. Before he left, Marcus asked for a tour of the shelter. Barbara walked him through the facility, introducing him to the animals and explaining the work they did. In the dog area, Marcus stopped in front of a kennel housing a black Labrador mix named Shadow. The dog had been with them for several months, overlooked by adopters because of his age and his tendency to be shy around strangers. What's his story? Marcus asked. Shadow came from an abuse situation. His previous owner neglected him terribly. When we got him, he was underweight and terrified of people. He's much better now, but he still has trust issues. He needs someone patient who can give him time to feel safe. Marcus watched Shadow, who was watching him back with cautious interest. I had a dog when I was a kid, Marcus said quietly. A black lab named Midnight, best friend I ever had. Would you like to meet Shadow? Yeah, I would. Barbara opened the kennel and Shadow approached carefully. Marcus knelt down and extended his hand, letting the dog sniff him. After a moment, Shadow's tail began to wag slightly. Hey there, buddy, Marcus said softly. You've had a rough time, haven't you? I know what that's like. They sat together for several minutes, Marcus petting Shadow gently, while the dog gradually relaxed. Barbara watched them, seeing something she had seen many times before, a connection being formed between two souls who had both suffered and survived. Can I adopt him? Marcus asked, looking up at Barbara. You want to adopt Shadow? My wife and I have been talking about getting a dog. Our kids are older now, and we have the time. Shadow seems like he'd be a good fit for us. He would need patience and understanding. He might have setbacks, moments when his fear comes back. That's okay. I understand about setbacks and fear. We'll work through it together. Barbara smiled. Then yes, you can adopt him. Let me get the paperwork. 2 weeks later, Barbara attended the official launch of the Chen Foundation for Legal Justice in Chicago. The event was held in a hotel ballroom with attorneys, judges, politicians, and members of the press in attendance. Marcus gave a speech about his experience with wrongful conviction and his vision for the foundation. He spoke eloquently about the importance of ensuring that everyone, regardless of their financial situation, had access to quality legal representation. I was lucky, Marcus said. I had Barbara Morrison fighting for me. She never gave up on me, even when the evidence seemed overwhelming. But not everyone is that lucky. There are innocent people sitting in prisons right now who never had a chance because they couldn't afford a good defense. This foundation exists to change that. When it was Barbara's turn to speak, she walked to the podium with a sense of coming full circle. She was back in Chicago, back in a room full of attorneys and legal professionals. But this time, she wasn't running away from her failure. She was building on it, using the lessons she had learned to help others. 2 years ago, I left this city believing I had failed as an attorney, Barbara began. I had lost a case for a client I believed was innocent, and that loss destroyed me. I thought I could never practice law again, that I was too broken to be of use to anyone. She paused, looking out at the audience. But I've learned something important since then. Failure is only permanent if we let it be. Marcus Chen's case wasn't a failure because I didn't fight hard enough or care enough. It was a failure of a system that's supposed to deliver justice but sometimes falls short. And instead of walking away from that system, we need to work to fix it. The audience applauded, and Barbara continued, "The Chen Foundation represents hope. Hope that innocent people won't be left to face the system alone. Hope that justice can prevail even when the odds seem impossible. And hope that all of us, attorneys and citizens alike, can work together to create a legal system that truly serves everyone." After the event, James Patterson approached her. "That was a wonderful speech, Barbara. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, James. For everything. You never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself. You never gave up on yourself. You just needed time to heal and find your way back. Speaking of which, how are things in Oregon?" "Good. Great, actually. The shelter is thriving, and I'm doing work that matters. I feel like I'm finally the person I was supposed to be." "I'm glad. But I hope you'll come back to visit more often now. Chicago misses you." "I'll come back for the foundation work. But Oregon is my home now." Barbara spent a few more days in Chicago, meeting with the foundation staff and helping to set up their initial cases. Then she flew back to Oregon, eager to return to Riverside and the shelter. Michael picked her up at the airport. "How was Chicago?" "Productive. The foundation is going to do amazing work, but I'm glad to be home." "The shelter missed you. We have 2 new dogs and a pregnant cat who came in while you were gone." "Of course we do. When do we ever not have new animals?" Michael laughed. "Never. That's why you're so busy." As they drove back to Riverside, Barbara looked out at the landscape. The mountains were green with new growth, and wildflowers were blooming along the roadside. The ocean stretched out to the horizon, vast and eternal. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the pain and struggle and eventual redemption. She thought about Marcus Chen, now free and building something beautiful from his suffering. She thought about the animals at the shelter, each with their own story of abandonment and resilience. Life was complicated and often painful. Justice was imperfect. People made mistakes, sometimes terrible ones. But there was also kindness, courage, and the possibility of second chances. Barbara Morrison had failed once, but she had also gotten back up, found her purpose, and dedicated herself to making sure others didn't fall the way she had. That, she realized, was what heroism really meant. Not never failing, but refusing to stay down when you did. 5 years later, 5 years after Barbara arrived in Riverside, the town was barely recognizable. The shelter had expanded significantly, now occupying a larger property donated by a grateful family whose pet had been saved by the shelter's work. The Morrison Center for Animal Welfare had become a regional training facility, hosting workshops and conferences that attracted people from across the Pacific Northwest. Barbara herself had become something of a regional figure. Her legal work, combined with her animal welfare advocacy, had earned her recognition and respect. She had argued cases before the state Supreme Court, advised legislators on animal protection laws, and helped shut down several puppy mills and abusive breeding operations. The Chen Foundation for Legal Justice had exonerated 3 wrongfully convicted individuals in its first 5 years and was working on dozens more cases. Barbara served on the board and spent 1 week every month in Chicago, working with the foundation's attorneys. But despite all her accomplishments and recognition, Barbara's favorite moments were still the quiet ones at the shelter, walking nervous dogs, coaxing shy cats out of their shells, sitting in kennels with animals who had given up on people, showing them that humans could be kind. On a warm summer evening, Barbara was at the shelter after hours, doing her usual rounds to make sure all the animals were settled for the night. She stopped at a kennel housing a new arrival, a senior golden retriever named Buddy, who had been surrendered when his owner moved to a nursing home. Buddy reminded her of Max, the first dog she had bonded with at the shelter. Like Max, Buddy was old and tired, overlooked by adopters who wanted younger animals. Like Max, he had kind eyes and a gentle spirit. Barbara opened the kennel and sat down beside Buddy. He rested his head in her lap, and she stroked his graying fur. "You're going to be okay," she told him. "You're going to find a home where you're appreciated, where you can spend your golden years being loved." As if he understood, Buddy's tail thumped softly against the floor. Barbara's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen. It was a photo of Shadow, now healthy and happy, playing with Marcus's children in their backyard. The message read, "Thank you for everything. Shadow sends his love. So do we." Barbara smiled and responded, "Give him a hug from me. And thank you for believing in second chances." Another text came in, this one from Sarah, who was still running the state's animal welfare program. "Just approved funding for 3 new shelters based on your model. You're changing the world, my friend." Barbara put her phone away and looked around the shelter. Through the windows, she could see the sun setting over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant colors. She could hear the soft sounds of animals settling in for the night, safe and cared for. She thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, broken and lost, fleeing from her failures. That woman had been so consumed by guilt that she couldn't see her own worth. She had measured herself only by her mistakes, not by her intentions, or her efforts, or her capacity for growth. But Barbara had learned something important. Failure is part of being human. What matters is what you do afterward. Do you let it destroy you, or do you let it teach you? Do you give up, or do you find a new way forward? She had found her way forward, and in doing so, she had discovered her true calling. Not defending wealthy clients or climbing the corporate ladder, but using her skills and experience to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Buddy nuzzled her hand, and Barbara returned to petting him. "You know what?" she said to the dog. "I think I'm going to take you home with me tonight. You shouldn't spend your first night here alone. What do you say?" Buddy's tail wagged more enthusiastically, and Barbara laughed. "I'll take that as a yes." She gathered Buddy's belongings, a worn blanket and a few toys that his previous owner had sent along, and led him out to her car. He climbed in willingly, settling on the passenger seat as if he had been riding with her for years. As Barbara drove through Riverside toward her house, she passed the darkened storefronts of Main Street, the diner where she had first confronted Vincent Cole, the library where Dorothy still worked. This small town had become her sanctuary and her battleground, the place where she had fallen apart and then rebuilt herself into something stronger. At home, Barbara made Buddy comfortable in her living room. She had fostered many animals over the years, and her house was well equipped with dog beds, food bowls, and toys. Buddy explored cautiously at first, sniffing each corner, checking every room. Finally, he returned to where Barbara sat on the couch and laid his head on her knee. "You're safe here," Barbara told him. "I promise." As she sat there with Buddy, Barbara thought about all the promises she had made over the past 5 years. Promises to animals that they would be cared for. Promises to clients that she would fight for them. Promises to herself that she would never again run from difficulty. She had kept those promises even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Her phone rang, and she saw it was Michael calling. "Hey," she answered. "What's up?" "Just got word about a new case. Family in Brooksville is being forced to give up their farm because of some questionable foreclosure proceedings. The bank is owned by a subsidiary of a larger corporation that's been buying up rural properties all along the coast. Sound familiar?" Barbara sighed. Another Grandview-type situation. Another powerful entity trying to push around people who couldn't fight back. "Send me the details. I'll look at it tomorrow." "I figured you'd say that. You ever think about taking a break?" "Not really. There's too much work to do." "Barbara, you're going to burn out." "No, I'm not. This is different from before. Before I was burning out because I was doing work that didn't matter to me. Now I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Fair enough. But promise me you'll take at least one day off this week. Go to the beach, read a book, spend time with that new dog I heard you're fostering. I promise. Now send me those files." After hanging up, Barbara opened her laptop and began reviewing the information Michael had sent. The case was complex, involving multiple legal issues and what appeared to be deliberate manipulation of the foreclosure process. It would take months to resolve, and the family couldn't afford to pay for representation. Perfect. This was exactly the kind of case Barbara loved. She worked for another hour, making notes and developing a preliminary strategy. Buddy slept peacefully at her feet, occasionally twitching in his dreams. Around midnight, Barbara finally closed her laptop and prepared for bed. Buddy followed her into the bedroom, and after a moment's hesitation, she patted the bed. "Come on up, just for tonight." Buddy jumped up carefully and curled up at the foot of the bed. Within minutes, he was snoring softly. Barbara lay in the darkness, listening to the ocean waves and the dog's gentle breathing. She thought about how far she had come from the broken woman who had arrived in Riverside 5 years ago. She thought about Marcus Chen, now thriving with his family and his foundation. She thought about all the animals who had passed through the shelter, finding safety and new homes. She thought about the cases she had won and the people she had helped. But mostly, she thought about tomorrow, about the work that still needed to be done, about the animals who would need care, the clients who would need representation, the fights that would need fighting. She was ready for all of it. As she drifted off to sleep, Barbara smiled. She had spent so many years running from failure, terrified of making mistakes, paralyzed by the weight of her guilt. But she had learned that courage wasn't about never being afraid or never failing. Courage was about showing up anyway, day after day, doing the work that needed to be done even when it was difficult or scary or seemed impossible. She had also learned that redemption wasn't something you achieved once, and then it was done. It was something you practiced every day in small acts of kindness and larger acts of justice. It was in every animal you helped, every client you represented, every fight you refused to walk away from. Barbara Morrison had failed. She had fallen. She had run away. But she had also come back. She had found her purpose. She had become the person she was always meant to be. And that, she realized as sleep finally claimed her, was the only heroism that really mattered. 10 years after Barbara first arrived in Riverside, the local newspaper ran a feature article about her work. The headline read, "Local Attorney's Journey from Failure to Heroism Inspires Community." Barbara was embarrassed by the attention, but Sarah convinced her to do the interview. "People need to hear your story," Sarah insisted. "They need to know that it's possible to come back from failure, that it's never too late to start over." The article detailed Barbara's career in Chicago, Marcus Chen's wrongful conviction, her arrival in Riverside, and the fight against Grandview development. It discussed the shelter's growth and the Chen Foundation's successes. It featured quotes from people Barbara had helped over the years. But the part that moved Barbara most was the section about the animals. The reporter had tracked down several families who had adopted pets from the shelter during Barbara's tenure. They shared stories about how these animals had changed their lives, about the love and joy that had come from giving a rescue animal a home. One family had adopted Bruno, the scared pit bull that Barbara had worked with in her early days at the shelter. 10 years later, Bruno was a certified therapy dog, visiting hospitals and nursing homes to comfort patients. Another family had adopted a 3-legged cat named Tripod, who had been found injured on the highway. Despite his disability, Tripod had become a beloved member of their family and had helped their daughter overcome her own struggles with anxiety. Each story was a testament to the ripple effects of compassion. Barbara had saved these animals, but in doing so, she had also touched the lives of the families who adopted them, and those families had in turn touched others. The article concluded with a quote from Barbara. "I don't consider myself a hero. I'm just someone who learned that the best way to deal with failure is to find a way to serve others. The animals taught me that. They don't dwell on the past or worry about the future. They just show up each day, ready to trust and love again, despite everything they've been through. If they can do that, so can I." After the article was published, Barbara received letters from people all over the country who had read it online. Many were attorneys who had left the profession because of burnout or disillusionment. Others were people dealing with their own failures and looking for a way forward. After the article was published, Barbara received letters from people all over the country who had read it online. Many were attorneys who had left the profession because of burnout or disillusionment. Others were people dealing with their own failures and looking for a way forward. Barbara tried to respond to as many as she could, offering encouragement and advice. She shared her own story honestly, including the painful parts, because she knew that authenticity was more helpful than perfection. One letter came from a young woman who had failed the bar exam 3 times and was considering giving up on becoming an attorney. Barbara wrote back, "Failure is just information. It tells you something didn't work, but it doesn't tell you to quit. Every successful person I know has failed multiple times. The difference is that they learned from their failures instead of being destroyed by them. Keep trying. You'll get there." Another letter came from a man who had lost his job and was spiraling into depression. Barbara responded, "I understand that feeling of losing your identity along with your career. But you are more than your job. You have skills, experiences, and a unique perspective that can be valuable in ways you haven't imagined yet. Give yourself time to grieve what you lost, then start exploring new possibilities. Your next chapter might be even better than the one you left behind." These letters reminded Barbara of why she had chosen this path. Yes, the legal work was important. Yes, saving the shelter had mattered. But the real impact was in showing people that transformation was possible, that failure wasn't final, that there was always a way forward if you were willing to look for it. The shelter continued to thrive. They had expanded their programs to include a low-cost veterinary clinic, a pet food bank for families struggling financially, and a humane education program that worked with local schools. Barbara had hired excellent staff who shared her vision and values, allowing her to focus on the bigger picture while they handled day-to-day operations. The Chen Foundation had grown as well. They now had offices in 5 states and had helped exonerate over 20 wrongfully convicted individuals. Marcus remained actively involved, speaking at law schools and conferences about the importance of criminal justice reform. Barbara and Marcus had become close friends over the years. They spoke regularly, sharing updates about their work and their lives. Marcus's children were now in college, and Shadow, though elderly now, was still part of the family. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said during one of their phone calls. "I used to think the worst thing that ever happened to me was being wrongly convicted. And it was terrible, don't get me wrong. But if it hadn't happened, I would never have started the foundation. I would never have found this sense of purpose. I would probably still be working at that software company, making good money, but not really making a difference. So you're saying you're grateful for the experience? Barbara asked, surprised. Not grateful, exactly. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, but I've learned to see it as a turning point rather than just a tragedy. It changed the direction of my life, and ultimately I like where I ended up. Barbara understood what he meant. She wouldn't go back and change her failure with Marcus's case, even if she could. That failure had led her to Riverside, to the shelter, to the work she was doing now. It had broken her open and allowed her to rebuild herself into someone better, someone more aligned with her true values. I think that's wisdom, Barbara said. Being able to see the whole picture, including the painful parts, and recognizing that it all had a purpose. Maybe. Or maybe we're just really good at making lemonade out of lemons. They both laughed, and Barbara felt grateful for this friendship that had emerged from such difficult circumstances.
As Barbara approached her mid-60s, she began thinking about succession planning. She wouldn't work forever, and she wanted to make sure that both the shelter and her legal practice would continue long after she retired. She identified a young attorney named Rachel Kim, who had been volunteering at the shelter while working at a corporate law firm. Rachel was smart, dedicated, and passionate about animal welfare. Barbara began mentoring her, teaching her about public interest law and how to balance legal practice with advocacy work. "Why did you leave corporate law?" Barbara asked Rachel one day as they worked together on a case. "Same reason you left Chicago, I think," Rachel said. "I was successful. I was making good money, but I felt empty. Every case I won made a corporation richer, but it didn't make the world better. I wanted to do work that mattered." Barbara smiled. "Welcome to the club. It pays less, but the benefits are better." "Like what?" "Like going to sleep at night knowing you spent your day fighting for something that matters. Like seeing the real, tangible impact of your work. Like being part of a community that shares your values." Rachel nodded. "That's exactly what I'm looking for." Over the next few years, Barbara gradually transitioned more responsibilities to Rachel and other staff members. She remained involved, but took on more of an advisory role, freeing up time to focus on the things she enjoyed most: working directly with animals, mentoring young attorneys, and writing articles about the intersection of law and animal welfare. She also started speaking at law schools, sharing her story with students who were just beginning their legal careers. Her message was always the same: define success on your own terms, stay true to your values, and don't be afraid to change direction if your current path isn't fulfilling you. The traditional model of legal success is making partner at a big firm, representing important clients, and making a lot of money, Barbara would tell students. And if that's genuinely what you want, if that work fulfills you, then great. But if you find yourself feeling empty or questioning whether you're making a difference, give yourself permission to explore other options. There are so many ways to use a legal education. Don't get trapped by other people's definitions of success. Some students dismissed her advice, convinced that they needed to follow the traditional path. But others listened, and Barbara received emails from them years later, thanking her for giving them permission to think differently about their careers. One evening, Barbara attended a celebration at the shelter marking its 30th anniversary. The event was held in the Morrison Center, which had grown into a beautiful facility with classrooms, meeting spaces, and state-of-the-art equipment. Hundreds of people attended, including current and former volunteers, adopters, donors, and community members. There were displays showing the shelter's history, with photos and stories from 3 decades of animal rescue work. Barbara walked through the displays, marveling at how much had changed since she first arrived as a lost, broken volunteer 15 years earlier. The shelter that had once been a modest operation on the verge of closing was now a thriving organization, that served as a model for similar facilities across the country. During the formal program, Rachel gave a speech about the shelter's impact. She shared statistics. Over 10,000 animals placed in homes, thousands more spayed and neutered to prevent pet overpopulation, hundreds of people trained in animal care and welfare. But the most moving part of the evening came when several adopters stood up to share their stories. An elderly man talked about the senior dog he had adopted after his wife passed away, and how that dog had given him a reason to keep going. A young mother talked about the cat that had helped her daughter learn about responsibility and compassion. A teenager talked about volunteering at the shelter after getting in trouble at school, and how working with the animals had changed his perspective on life. Each story was different, but they all shared a common thread. The shelter had changed lives, both animal and human. When it was Barbara's turn to speak, she walked to the front of the room feeling emotional. She looked out at all these people who had been touched by the shelter's work, who had opened their hearts and homes to animals in need. 30 years ago, a woman named Sarah Mitchell started this shelter because she saw a need in the community, Barbara began. She didn't have much money or resources. She just had a big heart and a determination to help animals who had nowhere else to go. She paused, gathering her thoughts. 15 years ago, I walked into this shelter for the first time. I was running away from my old life, carrying guilt and failure and a belief that I had nothing valuable to offer. Sarah gave me a chance to volunteer, and in doing so, she gave me a chance to heal. Barbara's voice grew stronger. The animals here taught me something important. They taught me that it's possible to trust again after being betrayed. It's possible to love again after being hurt. It's possible to start over, no matter how broken you feel. She looked around the room, making eye contact with people she had worked alongside for years. This shelter saved me just as much as I helped save it. And I know I'm not the only one. So many of you have stories about how this place changed your lives. That's the real magic of animal rescue. It's not just about saving animals. It's about the healing that happens when humans and animals help each other. The room was silent, and Barbara saw tears on many faces. So tonight, as we celebrate 30 years of this shelter's work, I want to honor everyone who has been part of this journey. The volunteers who show up every day to clean kennels and walk dogs. The foster families who open their homes to animals in need. The adopters who give these animals their forever homes. The donors who make all of this possible. And especially Sarah, who had the vision and courage to start this amazing organization. Everyone applauded, and Sarah, who had traveled from the state capitol for the celebration, stood up and hugged Barbara tightly. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for everything. For saving the shelter, for carrying on the work, for being the person I knew you could be." "Thank you for giving me a chance when I needed it most," Barbara replied. The celebration continued late into the evening, with people sharing stories and memories. Barbara stayed until the very end, reluctant to leave this gathering of her community, her extended family. As she finally walked to her car, Rachel caught up with her. "Barbara, I just want you to know that you're my hero," Rachel said. "The way you turned your life around, the work you've done, the people you've helped. You inspire me every day." Barbara was touched, but also a little uncomfortable with the label. "I'm not a hero, Rachel. I'm just someone who made mistakes and then tried to do better." Isn't that what heroism is, though? Not being perfect, but refusing to give up? Not never failing, but getting back up and trying again? Barbara thought about that. She had spent so many years believing that heroes were people who never failed, who always made the right decisions, who saved the day without breaking a sweat. But maybe real heroism was messier than that. Maybe it was about ordinary people facing their failures, learning from them, and choosing to keep moving forward despite their fears. Maybe you're right, Barbara said. Maybe heroism is just showing up day after day and doing the best you can with what you have. Exactly. And that's what you've done. That's what you've taught me to do. As Barbara drove home that night, she thought about the label hero and whether it applied to her. She had made mistakes. She had failed. She had run away from her problems. But she had also come back. She had fought when it would have been easier to give up. She had used her pain to fuel her determination to help others. If that was heroism, then maybe she could accept the title, not because she was special or exceptional, but because she represented something anyone could achieve: the courage to transform failure into purpose. Barbara Morrison officially retired from active legal practice at the age of 68. She remained on the boards of both the shelter and the Chen Foundation, but she stepped back from the day-to-day work, trusting the next generation to carry on what she had built. Retirement suited her. She spent her mornings walking on the beach, often accompanied by whatever foster dog she was currently caring for. She spent her afternoons reading, gardening, and volunteering at the shelter in a purely hands-on capacity, with no administrative responsibilities. She had more time for friendships, for travel, for simply being present in her life, rather than constantly pushing toward the next goal. Michael retired around the same time, and they continued their partnership in a more relaxed form, occasionally consulting on cases that interested them, but no longer carrying the weight of full-time practice. "We did good work," Michael said one day as they sat on Barbara's porch, watching the sunset over the ocean. "We did," Barbara agreed. "We helped a lot of people." Any regrets? Barbara thought about that question. Did she regret leaving Chicago? Did she regret the years of pain and guilt? Did she regret any of the choices that had brought her to this moment? "No," she said finally. "I regret the mistakes I made, but I don't regret the journey. Everything that happened, even the painful parts, led me to where I needed to be." That's wisdom. Or just old age, Barbara joked. But she knew it was more than that. She had spent years wrestling with her failures, trying to make sense of them, trying to redeem herself. And somewhere along the way, she had realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past or proving that she was good enough. It was about accepting her whole story, mistakes and all, and using it to create something meaningful. Marcus Chen visited Riverside one last time before Shadow passed away. The old dog was 16 years old, far exceeding the typical lifespan for his breed. He was slow and arthritic, but his eyes were still bright, and his tail still wagged when he saw Barbara. "He's had a good life," Marcus said as they sat together in Barbara's living room, Shadow sleeping peacefully between them. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to all of us," Barbara corrected. "You gave him a loving home. That's what he needed most." "You know, I've been thinking about something," Marcus said. "When we first met, you were drowning in guilt over my case. You felt responsible for my conviction. But you weren't responsible. The prosecutor who hid evidence was responsible. The jury who didn't see through the manipulation was responsible. The system that allowed an innocent man to be convicted was responsible. You did everything right. I should have kept fighting after the conviction. I should have appealed, investigated more, found the evidence that eventually cleared you. Maybe. Or maybe you needed to break down so you could rebuild into someone who could do the work you're doing now. Maybe my case was the catalyst you needed to find your true calling." Barbara considered that. "So you're saying that sometimes our failures are actually redirections?" "Exactly. Not every closed door is a tragedy. Sometimes it's just the universe pushing us toward a different path." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had been forever linked by a shared trauma, but who had both found ways to transform that trauma into purpose. When Shadow died peacefully in his sleep a few weeks later, Barbara attended the funeral Marcus's family held for him. They buried him in their backyard under a tree, and Marcus's children shared memories of the dog who had been their companion for so many years. "Shadow taught us about resilience," Marcus's daughter said. "He had been hurt and scared, but he learned to trust again. He learned to love again. That's a lesson I'll carry with me always." Barbara stood at the grave, crying for this sweet dog who had been given a second chance and had made the most of it. She cried for all the animals she had known and loved over the years. She cried for the younger version of herself who had been so broken and lost. She cried for Marcus and the time he had lost to wrongful imprisonment. But they were not entirely sad tears. They were also tears of gratitude for the journey, for the lessons learned, for the connections made, for the lives changed. On Barbara's 70th birthday, the shelter threw her a surprise party. She walked into the Morrison Center thinking she was there for a regular board meeting, only to find dozens of people waiting to celebrate her. There were former colleagues from Chicago who had flown in for the occasion. There were clients she had helped over the years. There were volunteers and adopters from the shelter. There were people she had mentored, lives she had touched, cases she had won. James Patterson was there, now fully retired and living in Arizona. "I told you that you'd find your way back," he said, hugging her. "I just didn't know it would be in such a spectacular fashion." Sarah was there with her family. Dr. Martinez was there. Commissioner Walsh was there. Even some of the county officials who had initially opposed Barbara in the Grandview fight were there, having long since recognized that she had been right to challenge the project. The celebration included speeches, toasts, and a video montage of Barbara's years in Riverside. There were photos of her with animals, with clients, with colleagues. There were testimonials from people whose lives she had changed. But the moment that moved Barbara most came when Rachel stood up to speak. "Barbara Morrison is my mentor, my role model, and my friend," Rachel said. "But more than that, she's proof that it's never too late to start over, that failure isn't final, that the second half of your life can be even more meaningful than the first half." Rachel paused, emotion in her voice. "When I met Barbara, I was on the verge of quitting law altogether. I was miserable in corporate practice, but I didn't think there were any other options. Barbara showed me a different path. She showed me that you can use legal skills to fight for justice, to protect the vulnerable, to make a real difference in the world." She looked directly at Barbara. "You once told me that heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, doing the work, and refusing to give up. You've lived that truth every single day. And because of that, hundreds of animals have been saved, dozens of people have received justice, and countless lives have been changed for the better. That's a legacy to be proud of." The room erupted in applause, and Barbara stood up, overwhelmed with emotion. She looked around at all these faces, all these people who had been part of her journey. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for giving me a chance when I needed it. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for being part of this incredible community." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "I came to Riverside 15 years ago as a broken woman. I had failed at something important, and I thought my life was over. But this town, this shelter, these animals, all of you, you gave me something precious. You gave me a second chance." Her voice grew stronger. "I've learned that life is long, and we all have multiple chapters. Some chapters end badly, some involve failure and pain and loss. But there's always the possibility of a new chapter, a fresh start, a chance to do things differently." She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as she could. If you're going through a difficult time right now, if you've made mistakes or experienced failure, I want you to know that it's not the end of your story. It's just the end of a chapter. You get to write what comes next. And with courage, compassion, and community support, you can create something beautiful. Barbara sat down to thunderous applause, feeling grateful and humbled and deeply happy. As the party wound down and people began to leave, Barbara stood outside the Morrison Center, looking at the building that bore her name. Inside, there were photos on the walls showing the shelter's history, including the dramatic fight against Grandview development that had saved this place. She thought about the day she had first walked into the shelter, broken and lost, looking for something to fill her empty days. She thought about Max, the first dog who had made her feel something other than guilt and sadness. She thought about the long journey from that day to this one. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and challenges and moments when she wanted to give up. But she had kept going, one day at a time, one animal at a time, one case at a time. And somehow, over the course of 15 years, she had transformed from a failed attorney running from her past into a pillar of her community, a mentor to young lawyers, an advocate for the voiceless, and a hero to many. Not because she was perfect or special or never made mistakes, but because she had refused to let her failure define her. She had chosen to get back up, to try again, to dedicate herself to work that mattered. That, Barbara understood now, was the true measure of a life. Not how many times you fell, but how many times you got back up. Not whether you made mistakes, but what you did afterward. Not avoiding failure, but transforming it into wisdom and purpose. As she stood there in the fading light, an elderly golden retriever named Sunshine approached her from inside the center. Sunshine had been at the shelter for over a year, overlooked because of her age and her medical issues. Barbara had been fostering her for the past few months. Sunshine sat down beside Barbara and leaned against her leg, the way dogs do when they're content and comfortable. Barbara scratched behind her ears and smiled. "You know what, Sunshine?" she said softly. "I think it's time to make this official. How would you like to be my dog permanently?" Sunshine's tail wagged, and Barbara laughed. "I'll take that as a yes." As they walked together back toward the parking lot, Barbara felt a profound sense of peace. She had spent so many years running from failure, terrified of making mistakes, desperate to prove her worth. But she had finally learned that worth wasn't something you proved. It was something you embodied through your choices, your actions, your willingness to show up and do the work even when it was hard. She had saved the shelter. She had helped countless animals. She had fought for justice. She had mentored the next generation. She had created a legacy of compassion and courage. But more than any of that, she had saved herself. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Barbara Morrison had failed. She had fallen. She had run away, but she had also risen. She had found her purpose. She had become a hero. Not the kind of hero who never stumbles, but the kind who gets back up every time she falls. The kind of hero we all can be if we just have the courage to try.